Does unlearning something mean you're wrong?
That is a very good question. Unlearning something means that you've realized that there's a better way for right now. And the reason I use better way is because it's away from the trigger of right and wrong. Right and wrong are very triggering words because they mean I'm better, you're not.
Welcome to Unexpected Journey, the show where each week top professionals share work wisdom and life lessons about their careers and what they have learned about human experience in the workplace. I'm your host, Bibb. In this week's episode, we have Zanele Njapha. Zanele is known as the Unlearning Lady. She is the world's leading voice on using key unlearning principles to help companies build cultures that support systemic change and transformation. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and leave your comments below. Now let's get started. Welcome back to Unexpected Journey. Today we have we have a couple of guests. For the very first time, I think, on Unexpected Journey, we have Bailey, and we have Corey. She's back here somewhere. We had a little glitch in the matrix today, and the dogs joined the show. But we also have just one of the most amazing people I have ever met, Zanele Njapha, who I met in South Africa. Your speech drew me in. And I'm going to be honest. When you stepped on that stage, I disengaged. I thought, okay, gorgeous lady, I'm going to multitask while I'm listening. But then you said something, and all of a sudden, I focused. So let's start with the obvious for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
What in the world is unlearning? Why is it important?
I love it. Sure. So I think a really great place to start of how I became known as the Unlearning Lady and how this whole thing started. So in my past life, I like to say I was a primary school teacher. I taught the fifth grade in South Africa, so what we call grade 5, for about 3 years. Loved it. I'd been dreaming about being a teacher for a very long time. So when it happened, it was perfect. Everything worked really well. And then what I started to realize is that children were so creative. They were so good at being inquisitive, asking questions, pushing the boundaries, even when you don't want them to. But all of the things that so many organizations were calling future skills, children already had. And then I entered a speaking competition. I was still very much a teacher, but I had the dream of speaking. I entered a speaking competition and I started to get requests from organizations to speak about future skills. Now, here's what started happening in my brain. But children already have future skills. How come organizations that are made up of adults, grown professionals, are asking for future skills? That's when the idea around this concept of unlearning and this concept of the need to focus on unlearning was born. Because literally what was happening was the realization that if we start off with these skills, what then happens in between that causes us right at the end when we're all professionals and we're in these organizations to then no longer have them? That's when it became really clear that our biggest work doesn't necessarily need to be learning per se, but peeling away the layers that then create all of this noise between where we are and where we want to step into. So that's really what unlearning is. It's the capacity or the skill to let go of a perception, a way of seeing, a way of doing, a way of being, to then grab hold of a new way of seeing things, a new way of being, and a new way of doing.
Well, that kind of ties in very well to where you drew me in. You put something up on the screen and you were asking us to look at it. And I can't remember what it was. I think it was dancers. And you said, look at this dancer. And is it twirling left or twirling right? Then you put up what appeared to be the same dancer and asked if it was twirling left or twirling right. And from almost everybody in the room, it looked like they were changing direction. It was fascinating to sit there and watch, not just myself, but everybody in the room kind of do a double take. And I think that moment is pretty much when you got everybody's attention of you need to unlearn how you're looking at things and you need to focus.
Yes.
And
that assumption.
And it just really was amazing. You've said before, people don't take me seriously on stage until I start speaking.
Yes, it is. It's a gift and a curse. I love it when you said, when we had our conversation not too long ago, that I need to see it as a superpower. And that exactly is what it has become for me, because I've gotten that feedback consistently. People will say, Zanele, you've got this tiny body. You come up on stage and I think, okay, this one I can skip. I don't have to listen to this. I'll listen to the next speaker. And then when I start speaking, it's a different conversation. But you know what the significance of it is? And I really want our listeners and our viewers to hear this. The concept of unlearning is exactly that. So when you experience me, when audiences experience me, they're actually experiencing the concept of unlearning, especially in the way that I teach it, which is that making an assumption, being aware of what the assumption is, and then challenging it. So in whatever we do consistently, our brains are making up assumptions to help us fill in gaps in knowledge, gaps in understanding. And unless we take on a stance of awareness around what those assumptions are and then push back at them, we don't get taught. I mean, I don't know about you, but I wasn't taught to push back at assumptions when I was growing up.
Oh, no. In fact, I was actively taught to not push back.
Exactly. But what I've found is that we've almost gotten to a place in society globally where people have almost given themselves permission to rethink how they approach change, which is what makes unlearning even more relevant than it's ever been. I was actually looking at Google's year in search for 2022, where they published some of the highest searched phrases, words, keywords, themes. And one of the most searched phrases was, can I change ... So can I change my job? Can I change my spouse? Can I change where I live? And what that says for me is that people want and are hungry, but also excited to change. And it's funny because my business, when I launched it, our big vision is to create a world where it's okay to change your mind. And that's what unlearning is about. It's about saying, I understand that, yes, things used to be different, but I'm stepping into something new now, not with the fear of being ridiculed, but with the understanding that the only way to really do life is to change.
But can you tell us some information about one or two organizations or maybe even industries that have shown some really great impact because of unlearning?
Because when we speak about unlearning in terms of its value in business, what we're actually talking about is we're talking about a diverse array or a perspectives and views. That's literally what brings on an environment and a culture where individuals can challenge the status quo. So that, I think, is the basis that I want to use as we have the rest of this conversation. Because when most organizations, especially the ones that I've worked with, when I come in to facilitate, when I come in for an intervention of any kind around a transformation initiative, most of us are still basing our success on John Cotter's 70% from 1995, that 70% of organizations are unsuccessful in their transformation efforts. But here's the strange thing then, Anne. So yes, there is a lot of that data, and that's a lot of what we're basing a lot of our transformation efforts on, and how that fear of unlearning and letting go comes through, because we know that jumping doesn't necessarily yield positive results. Now, what I want to jump back with is that here's the sad news, is that data still today actually shows that that number hasn't changed that much. The Harvard Business Review actually says that 70% is quite conservative. They say that only 22% of organizations that jump into transformation initiatives actually see that change through. Now, here's where the unlearning comes in. The unlearning then comes in to say, unless change becomes a culture that people embrace, then whatever transformation initiatives we jump into, we try, we work on, they are not going to succeed, because a culture where people are excited, but also okay with letting go and grabbing hold, is the kind of culture that sustains an organizational transformation, sometimes of a large scale.
22%. That number is just sticking in my head. Only 22%?
And that was 2021.
Wow.
Makes you think, right?
It truly does make you think about, because almost every company that I know is talking about actively working on or moving towards or being within a transformation, digital transformation, employee transformation, customer experience transformation. It's all transformation. And when you think about how everybody's talking about being within this transformation, but only 22% of them are, that blows my mind, really.
Yeah. And then to bring it down to unlearning when it comes to organizational transformation, but also setting up our organizations for success and making sure that our customers, all stakeholders in the organization have that experience of stepping confidently into change. So one of the really exciting pieces of research I was looking at not too long ago was published by Korn Ferry. And they said poor performing organizations are 79% more likely to have less self-awareness than organizations that perform better. So organizations with a higher rate of return are 79% more likely to be successful than those who have low self-awareness. And here's why that's important, is because unlearning starts with that self-awareness. So when individuals within a given team, whether it's the leadership team specifically or individuals on the ground who interact directly with our customers and clients, are self-aware in understanding who they are, how they wish to grow, how they wish to expand, but also how they can create that link between the organization's goals and their own personal goals, actually contribute to not just the success of the organization at the organizational level, but even at the level of the stock market and the value of the organization overall.
You know, I think more businesses really need to look at this. And I'm going to take that back. It's not more businesses, more leaders. More leaders need to look at this. And it's also an introspective thing from an individual level, because when you really look at it, it really ties into individual level. So how does it actually impact individuals when they embrace unlearning?
I love this question because it ties back to something that we've already touched on, which is that idea of mental flexibility. So that's the big idea behind unlearning. I often joke around with the teams that I work with and I say, when we strategize, when we sit in a strategy conversation, everybody brings the brain that they've trained. Nobody is going to get an opportunity to borrow someone else's brain, bring it to the room, and then after the strategy session, you return it to the person. Everyone brings the flexibility or the level of mental flexibility that they have trained themselves to. On that idea then, a framework that I teach for individuals to build mental flexibility, and I'd love to invite our listeners and viewers to do the exact same. It's called Switch, Shift, Shuffle. And all it is 3 different ways to organize your environment so that you are consistently being stimulated in a range of different ways to think differently, to perceive differently, but also to show up in a brand new way. So the very first one, switch. Switch is all about thinking about the things that you do almost without thinking about it. I like to think of it as switching the hand that you brush your teeth with, switching the hand you brush your hair with. So think about the things that almost happen without thinking, instinctively. As soon as you do any of those things, maybe for the rest of today, stop and ask yourself, what's another way to do what I'm about to do now? So I was about to grab my water. I can ask myself, oh, I often grab it with this hand, or it's always sitting on the side of the desk. Something as tiny as that. So that's switch. And then shift is the next one. Shift is all about our environments. I'm a little bit ashamed to say this here, Anne, but I'm going to say this. For a very long time, I had my bedroom, my living room arranged in the exact same way for possibly more than 10 years. I tend to like my stability, but when I realized just how much I can leverage my environment for consistent stimulation, everything changed. So this is one I want people to take seriously.
Is this why I like to change the curtains in my office every so often?
Do you? You are amazing.
Like I do. I mean, I've
awesome.
had these curtains a little bit longer than I usually do, but
Uh-huh.
I do that. That's fascinating.
So that's shift. Shift is all about moving your environment around. I often advise people start with something like a pot plant. Just move that common pot plant that you have in that same corner all the time to a different corner. And then one thing, and then maybe every 2 months, just something small that allows you to consistently be refinding, almost reacclimatizing to your environment. Now, you don't want to do it to a level where you are getting confused every time you walk into your house, because the brain does need a sense of safety, a sense of familiarity. So that's the second one. And then the very last one, switch, shift, shuffle. Shuffle is all about your day-to-day routines. Often when we look at our diaries, we'll find out we're eating the same thing for breakfast. We are starting at the gym at 8 o'clock every day. We are sleeping at the same time. That's good because your circadian rhythm is really important. But certain things are exactly the same all of the time. We see the same people. We go to the same coffee shop because we just love the way they do coffee and no one else does it like them.
But this is why I'm a fan of flexible work, right? Like, and why I always tell my team, I don't care when you work or what, just as long as you get your job done and it's done correctly, do it when you feel like you're going to be most successful. The same place, like we were talking about, where, also when. Sometimes I'm in my office working at 8 o'clock at night because I'm feeling productive. Other times, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's the shuffle.
Yes, it is. One particular organization I worked with, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, does a tell me something new presentation. So every 2 weeks, they invite one person from the team to just speak about a topic that's completely unrelated. Now, they're not the only organization that does this, but I found out quite a few of them do. Speak about something that has nothing to do with the work that we do at the organization or the work we do in this team. Talk about plants, talk about woodwork, something completely different. Teach us something that you love, but you love outside of work. And let's see how that influences how we innovate and how we think creatively. Any thoughts on those 3 tips?
I love it. And see, so I will tell you this. When this episode airs, keep a close watch on the YouTube channel. So we do post this episode on YouTube. It's on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's on Google Podcasts. But for some reason, our YouTube subscribers are incredibly active in the comments. And so I'm going to ask you guys right now, comment with regard to our, switch, shift, shuffle. And tell us how you do all 3 of those things in the comments. And I know I'm going to be watching, and I'm going to tell you right now, I bet Zanele is going to be watching as well. And you might get some responses from both of us on our YouTube channel when this episode airs. So keep a watch. Tell us how you switch, shift, and shuffle, and we will be responding back to you. What's the biggest challenge that you've run into from individuals being resistant to unlearning?
I think it's 2 things. And I use these 2 challenges almost as a basis to advise leaders, to work with organizations so that they can support individuals. And the 2 really are, the first one is grieving and the second one is not knowing why. The first one being grieving. One of the most important things that I found are key to understand during change, during transitions, is that individuals, when they transform and transition, are letting go of something. So there's a sense of loss and detachment there. Because think about it, and I'd like to invite the listener and the viewer to think about this as well. When you think about the last job you had, or maybe the last position you held at any given organization or in your own business, and what you have now, when you let go of the other one, I'd like you to think about what that meant. Because it wasn't just a job, it wasn't just a position, but that position had almost been tied into different parts of your life. It meant something to you. It was associated with what you could provide your children, how far you had to drive, what you spent on gas every month. So there's that beautiful almost lattice that gets created between our jobs or what we're losing and who we are, our sense of identity. That's why that first part or that first challenge is where most organizations and leaders miss the mark, when they're just rushing everyone. Okay, let's all unlearn, jump into the next thing we need to do now. Instead of allowing teams and individuals to grieve. because there's a process there of having lost something that was dear, that had been tucked into the most dear parts of our lives. So allow individuals in your team to grieve. I often like to suggest the idea of maybe sitting down as a team and reflecting on how great things used to be when you used to use that system, or when this leader used to be around, or when we were still at the office. Take an opportunity to just play around with that thought so that individuals can process. The book Navigating Transitions by William Bridges says that a transition and a change are two different things. Change is the system when all the processes have been put in place, but the transition is what people need to do in here and in here. So you might not be, if you're listening, you might not be able to see that. So in your heart and psychologically in your brain. And this could be individuals that are going through the unlearning process in their personal lives, letting go of a perception of a sense of self-sabotage that they've been facing consistently. So that's the first one. And then the other one is understanding why. This one I find to be a lot more relevant with professionals that are being asked by their organizations to transition, to let go of. I'll give you an example that I had quite a lot of last year, a little less now, but quite a bit of organizations were inviting me in to say, Zanele, they don't want to come back to the office. Come and help us. Let's help everyone unlearn working from home, get them to jump back in because we need to get our numbers looking good. And that was a very interesting call. But what happened there is that second issue, telling people why, helping people to understand not just why coming back to the office or whatever transition it is good for not just the organization, but good for them. Because at the end of the day, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, individuals are, or people, human beings are at their very center, not in a selfish way, but self-serving. We want to look after ourselves. That's why if you hear a loud sound, you jump because you're thinking, am I going to die? And so even if the organization, the CEO, the COO says, hey, everyone, it's time to jump and do this particular thing, jump into this project. The first question that we ask ourselves, what's in it for me? How is that going to help me? How is that going to help me serve my grandmother who's at an old age home the way that I still serve her at the moment, or better? People are asking the questions of how change affects them at a personal level. And that is the second challenge that I find organizations don't quite speak to often enough.
Yeah, we call that the WIFM, the what's in it for me, the WIFM. And I don't think that's anything new. That's something that's been around for a very long time, is you always have to answer for the WIFM. And it's very rare to come across a situation where you don't have to answer the WIFM, that you find a servant leader that is truly a servant leader, that is there that thinks just about their people, that will actually give up their job for others, that will actually do something that impacts their life negatively for other people. It happens, and it happens more than we like to think. But that is not the norm. The norm is that right now in the world, people want to know how it's going to impact their life. And this is strictly one of the things that I have observed. And that is that because especially in the United States, over the last several decades, corporations and businesses have really pushed the boundaries beyond the boundaries of what they can get out of employees. So now people are saying, we're going to set our boundaries and we're going to stick to them. And if you want us to step out of our boundaries, what is in it for me?
Yeah.
Is it a pay raise? It is a title. Is it what is it? Because they have been extended outside of those boundaries. And that's why we're having so much corporate burnout at this point.
Yeah. I strongly agree. Yeah. I hear the same conversation all the time. I mean, I attend conferences for a living, but every now and again, when it's time to have lunch, that's the conversation we're having. Everyone is so tired. We're more productive than we've ever been, but we are more tired. We are more burnt out. We are more fatigued than we've ever been as well.
And I think that it comes down to, and I find it interesting that so many, and I think you're going to continue to get people coming and asking you to have people unlearn how to work at home and relearn how to work at the office. But I find that interesting. And people ask, why have they been so productive working at home? It's because individuals have to learn how to set boundaries to work at home and still respect the boundary that your work hour ends at 5 o'clock. That's one reason. The other reason is that they're not having the interruption of the drive-by desk stopping and talking. They're also not having the hallway conversations that extend returning to the desk. Like they are sitting at their desk actually working, and that has increased a lot of productivity during this time of working from home. If we return to the office, and there's nothing wrong with working from the office, a lot of people work better from the office, and those individuals absolutely should. And I am a strong believer of let people work where they're going to be successful. If you work better at an office, go work in an office. If you work better at home, work from home. If you work better part-time in an office, part-time at home, go hybrid. But work where you're going to be successful. If you need to change it up, change it up. But the productivity has to do with the focus and your ability to focus in the setting that you're in.
Yeah.
So that, and I think that also ties into learning.
Yes, it does. And unlearning as well. I think it's so interesting what you are mentioning because it reminds me of a conversation that I had on a podcast that Audi was doing when they were launching their electric vehicles in South Africa. The question came, what do you think is the future of the office? And I went, oh goodness, no office at all. And it sounded a bit cheeky at the time, but I think it goes towards what you're saying. And it's the exact same thing. That unlearning is about saying, how do we create a culture where we are consistently reevaluating what we use, the tools we have, the way we do business, the protocols that serve us, the systems that we have, to understand whether or not they're still relevant for the objectives we want to serve. Going back to that idea of the office, the objective is a lot of the time to actually get things done. Now, the tool of the office does exist as a tool, but how does it serve us today in the current context? And that's just a little shift that is so important to make, especially when it comes to our work context, because we find that we no longer serve our clients, but also our team in the same way when we fail to make that reevaluation a culture that people know is consistently happening and that we can execute.
You know, it's interesting because it has come up on almost every single episode that leadership training was a huge miss across the pandemic and work at home. And that is, work at home wasn't a failure. Work at home isn't a failure. Remote work is not a failure. Training leadership how to lead and manage work remotely, that was the miss. And you just said basically the same thing in a different way. People need to learn how to lead. People need to learn how to manage. They need to learn so many things and unlearn so many things about that whole system.
Yeah.
So that is a consistent message across the board.
Yeah. And one final thing to add to that is that as leaders go through that process, one of the most important things around unlearning is understanding that you will always be experimenting and be okay with that, be fine with that, and understand that there isn't necessarily a wrong and a right, but it's what suits the current context. So experiment and allow that process to always be happening, but in an exciting way.
You just said something I want to kind of go after because this is one thing that I think a lot of individuals may have an issue with unlearning because they feel like it means that they're wrong. Does unlearning something mean you're wrong?
That is a very good question. Unlearning something means that you've realized that there's a better way for right now. And the reason I use better way is because it's away from the trigger of right and wrong. Right and wrong are very triggering words because they mean I'm better, you're not. This is how we do things. You stay there. It almost separates individuals, but also separates us into little pacts as well. So when we say better for the context, better suited for right now, then it says that we can always change because the situation around us is consistently changing. There's a different energy there that, like you said, I found so many C-suite leaders have trouble with. But here's the thing, and this is going back to what you said earlier on in this conversation. They want to, and many of us don't know it. But the reason why they can't is because at a bigger systemic level, the bigger system, which I won't say too much about, but the bigger system has not yet been shaped in such a way that people can be okay with making mistakes, trying things out at the expense of the business, if you know where I'm going with that.
So what are some signs that, say I'm an executive level position in an organization, and I need to know what signs to look for that we as an organization might need to unlearn. What am I looking for?
So one of the things that could tell you that it's time for your organization to unlearn is definitely firstly looking at your numbers, but maybe not going too deeply into that. One of the biggest things that will tell you is understanding what your vision is for the current, maybe financial year, so to speak. So look at what your strategic intentions or goals are, and then have a look at how the individuals in your team are responding to that. Does it look like you're on track towards that? But also, is there any resistance? So are you getting responses when you have conversations with your team, conversations with your customers and clients that look like they could hinder or get in the way of whatever it is that the strategic goal is? For example, if by the end of this year, 2023, you would like all of the individuals in your team that were office-based to be completely back in the office, but so far, based on the data and whatever it is you're tracking, it looks like you're not going to be reaching that goal, for example. That is a clear sign that there's something that needs to be unlearned there, but not necessarily that people need to unlearn, back to what we were saying, coming back to the office, or they need to unlearn working from home. There's something else there that needs to be done. Maybe the unlearning is, what is the purpose of the office? Do we still need it? Can we work around a new hybrid working model that then works for where our company is right now?
And as an individual, if I'm in this position and I see these things, but I'm not quite at that level, how do I present this to my leaders?
That's a very tricky one. That's always a very, very tricky one. So one of the things I always say is start off with your line manager. There is the practical, technical part of this, but then there's also the approach part of this. So the technical part is speak to your line manager, have a conversation, but then there's also how you do it. When most of us come across any resistance that we feel around a change that's being implemented in the organization, often we come at it with guns blazing, because we're going, I don't want to see this. This is disruptive for me as an individual, but also for fellow team members. So there's the approach, how you approach it, and then speaking to the correct individuals and addressing it in such a way that it becomes clear how not only you are suffering, but also how the organization in the long term starts to suffer. Because unfortunately, this is where we still are in corporate culture, where something has to make sense, both how it's affecting individuals, but also how the organization in the long term, along with the organization's strategic goals, are going to get affected by whatever it is that's happening.
If you're talking to that individual right now, and they're having this realization that I think I need to do this. I think I need to unlearn. I realize that I have not been receptive to this, but I'm scared. Like I'm too scared to take that step. What would you say to that person right now on an individual level to let them know that it's okay?
Wow. Oh, goodness. And I can almost feel the emotion. I don't know, Anne, it feels like you might have you're probably really empathetic. But the way that you said that really helped me to feel some of those emotions that so many individuals are feeling across a range of different organizations. And one of the reasons why they feel like that is because they feel almost powerless within the system to influence any kind of change. So what I would say to that individual is firstly to understand that it's okay that they've recognized this, because often there is a lot of guilt and shame that's associated with being dissatisfied with a change. And the first thing to do is free yourself of any kind of guilt around feeling the way that you feel, and understand that the reason why you have any kind of resistance is because there's a misalignment between what you see for yourself and what the organization sees for themselves or for the bigger whole, which is the company itself. So once that has been sorted, then let's talk about what you can possibly do. Maybe you want to start with having, like I mentioned earlier on, a conversation with your line manager. Do you have someone that you trust within the organization that you could book maybe a 15-minute, 30-minute call with and sit down and have a conversation? When it is time to have the conversation, start off by telling them how long you felt this way. Are there specific instances within your journey with the company, maybe relating to the change itself, that you can start to touch on as you have that conversation with them? Make sure you map those out. Consider even bringing in the voices of other individuals in the team. Don't name and shame if you don't have permission to do so, but maybe mention that this is something we've been talking about during such and such a meeting. This was brought up. Make sure that you come up or into the meeting with your ducks in a row, so that the individual you're speaking to understands that this is something that they can take further on as well. And then to top it all off, like I mentioned earlier on, put something together around how you see this dissatisfaction, or maybe your unlearning journey. You want to unlearn, you'd like the organization to potentially invest in this, or maybe you feel like the organization needs to unlearn. Map out how, if that doesn't actually get done, it could potentially affect the organization. Whether that means that the organization has a high turnover, maybe that means the organization loses time, loses money in any kind of way. Map that out so that the issue becomes not just about you as an individual, because yes, you do matter, but it also starts to become about the organization at a much larger systemic level.
Amazing. So, Zanele, how would people get in touch with you if they wanted to?
A range of different ways, but one of the best ones is to go over to zanelenjapha.com, which is my website. I'm also on let me be honest, I live on Instagram. So the Unlearning Lady might be the easiest one for people to find me on there as well. But those are really the two best places. LinkedIn also works. I'm on LinkedIn as Zanele Njapha, the Unlearning Lady, there as well. But if you search for me on Google, you should be able to connect with me in a way that suits you.
And as always, we will have links in the description of the show for all of our guests that are listening today, because we want you to be able to connect with Zanele and learn how to unlearn. Zanele, thank you so much for joining us. It has been a pleasure. And we're going to stay in touch, and I'm sure you'll be on the show again at some point. So thank you everybody for joining us this week on Unexpected Journey. We look forward to seeing you again next week. As we wrap the episode up, we would like to take this time to thank you for joining us this week on Unexpected Journey. Our guest information will be linked in the episode description, along with a link to our company website, remoteevolution.com, and our host website, Bibb.com. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on your favorite podcast app and on our YouTube channel so that you never miss an episode and we can continue to bring them to you. Let us know your thoughts on what we discussed in the comment section. And once again, thank you for joining us. We hope to see you again next week for another episode of Unexpected Journey.